It's the morning after the closure of the transfer deadline, and it was another disappointing month for Newcastle in terms of incomes. A third straight window without a major first team signing. Lots of questions from fans, lots of questions from you, and in this video I'm going to be getting through them in another Q&A session ahead of the Arsenal semi-final in the Cup on Wednesday. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Before we get going, please continue to like, share and subscribe. Looking to get to 1,000 subscribers by the end of the season. I know it's been a little bit different to what I've said it would be over the last few weeks and months, but hopefully I'm going to be getting back out there and bringing you different stories, and also hopefully this podcast will get off the ground, having a few technical issues in terms of how to do it from my end, but it will happen hopefully very, very soon. In the meantime, still talking about Newcastle United, and I asked you guys to give me some questions for another Q&A session off the back of that window, because I know lots of people are wondering what's going on and why Newcastle have acted in certain ways this month, why they haven't done certain things, why they've not communicated particularly well. That's certainly my criticism and my view, but I've got some questions from you guys here and I'm going to get through them over the course of the next 20 minutes or so bear with me. The first question is from Stephen Dyson. He says, is our transfer activity a choice as much as PSR driven? Aston Villa, a comparable club, sell to buy more. Howe seems to like a stable group and lineup, and maybe he would rather improve an in-house player rather than add a risky new face. Anything in that in your view? I don't think that he doesn't want to add players and Newcastle don't want to add players. This is all PSR driven, I think, is the answer to why Newcastle haven't added. But that doesn't mean it's not a choice as well. Newcastle could have spent this window. They could have spent in the summer on Gahey, that's the point. And lots of people were asking where that money has gone, why they haven't done that, why with Gahey but not with anybody else. Having sort of thought it over the last few days, and I don't necessarily agree with this. I think the fans' perspective and the club's perspective are very different on these things. I think that the club have looked at it and said, we can really push at it in the summer after this headroom comes in. Lloyd Kelly goes, the 20 million comes in. Miguel Almiron goes, and that 10 million comes in. And they can really, they've cleared headroom. Mark Douglas in the Eye this week said that they've cleared £100 million worth of headroom, plus any budget that's existing there as well. There's no need to sell and panic in June, and they can really attack that window, maybe even exploit some clubs who are maybe worried about that deadline themselves, be on the other side of that fence, and then they can push on and go for that. I understand the question about risk, and you're right that Eddie Howe likes to have a settled team and doesn't like to let go of players, because from his perspective he'll have looked at it and thought, well, the numbers are dwindling. If you listen to Eddie Howe's press conference this morning, he's already admitted that it wasn't his decision to sell Lloyd Kelly, because from his perspective, he's lost a player. From the club's perspective, they've gained headroom, and their thinking is medium to long term always, especially in the boardroom. That's how they view it. And Eddie Howe does prefer Premier League proven players. I think we've shown that. I think he was the main driving force behind the Gahey pursuit in the summer. But I don't think it's about wanting to keep the group together. Villa are comparable, but they've also got more sellable assets, and their squad, I think, is more comparable throughout it. It's a stronger squad than Newcastle, in my opinion. They don't have a player like an Isak, like a Tonali, like a Bruno. There's a lot more quality that they can sell in that regard, whereas if Newcastle are to sell a key player, they'll lose a lot from their first team. Probably kind of does need saying is that Newcastle have avoided having to sell a key player once again, and that is really important because they can attack the summer. And I'll get into the explanation on this a little bit later, but as I said, I think the club will view the summer a little bit differently to the fans. The fans look at it and think that if they don't get in the Champions League, Alexander Isak will leave. Newcastle look at it and think, well, if Alexander Isak wants to leave, it's going to be very difficult even in the summer when he's got 3 years on his contract. We've got to back our plan to invest long term and make ourselves the club that Isak wants to stay at long term, even if that means some short term payment. There will be some risks, but even in the summer, it'll be on Newcastle's terms because he's got 3 years on his deal. It might make him signing a new deal tougher, but that is part of the risk that they've taken. And I think they've looked at this squad and thought they're in the European race. The Europe is far from out the question. They're playing well overall. Let's take this risk for this huge reward. And that's why they haven't pushed on in this January window. I hope that answers the question. Second question is from Geordie Bootboy, who says, have the executive team at Newcastle done enough to support Eddie Howe during the window? Probably not a yes or no answer. Have they given him the best opportunity to succeed this season? The reality is they probably haven't, because they're going back to that long-term thinking, and I think that 3 windows without a first-team major signing is difficult. But Eddie Howe has done really well in that scenario, and he has got the club in the position. So I think the answer is no. But again, I would refer back to my previous answer and say, for the betterment of the club and long-term sustainability of the club from their perspective, instead of viewing it as this is an opportunity to take a risk to get into the Champions League, which is what I certainly advocated for, I still believe that. Myself and also other people have said that as well. They're looking at it and thinking, well, the reward for us is the fact that we can really spend big in the summer and rebuild the team if need be to push on for the next stage. With all the key players on long-term contracts and signed up to new deals, or with existing long deals, they're not worried about sales in that regard, and I think that's why they've taken this risk. But the answer to the question is no, they haven't really, because they've not given Eddie Howe a major first-team signing for the 3 windows now. Question 3 is from Clock Toys. Given the realistic possibility of achieving Champions League football, coupled with the fact that the exiting players would have definitely got game time, I will be worried if we do not see any incoming players, even if they are just loans. So this was sent to me before the deadline, obviously, as you can tell by the framing of the point. I understand the argument. Again, though, I think the ultimate point is that the club thinks differently to the fans. The fans think there's Champions League football on the line, and these players that we have will want Champions League football. They'll be vulnerable to sales in the summer, and these players would have helped. They would have got game time. There's a lack of squad depth in the short term. They're definitely weaker now. They're definitely not in the strongest position to attack this run for the Champions League and also the cups as well. But that's not how the club is viewing it. As I say, everything is medium to long term and sustainability down the line, and they have to take those risks in their view. I agree, though, with the point. They haven't strengthened, they have weakened themselves, and it has made it more difficult. And Miguel Almiron would have been a good option for Jacob Murphy off the bench, maybe at certain times late in games, as he has been fleetingly this season, and especially if Murphy got injured. There is no answer to that now. Lloyd Kelly, more at left back, to be honest, than centre back, because Dan Burn and Sven Botman and Fabian Schär have been battling out for that centre-back spot. Jamal Lascelles shouldn't be too far away, given that he was injured with the same injury as Botman just a few weeks later, so he shouldn't be too far either. So Lloyd Kelly probably makes a little bit more sense, especially given the headroom that he'll bring in. But I do agree that the short-term view is a difficult situation for Eddie Howe to battle with. But the club, as I've tried to explain earlier, think of it differently. They don't view the situation with the players in the same way. They view them as good opportunities for PSR, and in reality they've had to bite the bullet a little bit with the aim of going into the summer and being able to spend big and really finally for once and for all fix these issues. Juan asks, was there not one player who could have been found to enhance the squad in some way? And I think if you look back at my videos, you'll know that the one player that I think would have been the right player to go for is Jonathan David. I fully understand the arguments that a lot of people did have, and the club may have, that getting somebody in at centre-back or getting somebody in at right midfield who isn't a real upgrade and the quality that they need ahead of the summer, when they can really go and solve those issues, that would be pointless. And I do understand that. So for my argument, I would have looked at Jonathan David as a player who they want in the summer on a free transfer. Lille made him available for around £20 million, as we were told on this channel by Steve Caldwell, who's very close to Jonathan David and his entourage. So he knows the situation, and he told us that was the price in the summer. French football expert Julien Laurent was on Match of the Day's Champions League coverage last week, and he said that as David scored another goal in the Champions League, that he would be available if there was a bid made. Lille might have to listen to it, because they're not going to sign him to a new deal. He's going to leave on a free in the summer, even though they want him to help push them into the Champions League for next year. I think it would have been worth the deal. I think it would have been worth the question. Put that bid in and see if they can get him, because if you can get him in, it gives everybody that lift. There's a new player coming in, and it at least gives another attacking option, because as we just mentioned about Jacob Murphy, if Alexander Isak gets injured, Newcastle's form could really nosedive very quickly. Whereas if Jonathan David came in, a proven European and domestic top 5 league goal scorer, for a nominal fee, which was what it would have been compared to what he's actually worth, ahead of the summer, getting ahead of the long queue that would have been available, I would have tried that. That's what I would say, because I do understand that if you're going to go and get a second or third choice centre-back or a second or third choice right midfielder, the options out there in January were very sparse in those positions. That's when Newcastle really want to rally and improve in the summer. That's why that didn't happen. But Jonathan David is a player that they want in the summer, and he would definitely improve the squad and first 11 when called upon. So that's the player I would have definitely gone for. Simon Sharple says, do you think maybe the management have assurances that our Champions League level players won't push for a move next season if we miss out on it, and that's why they're putting all the transfer eggs in the summer basket? Otherwise, it would be very, very short-sighted not to get somebody in. The answer to that is no, I think, to be honest. I think the players, if you're a player, why would you tell a club that you're not going to push for a move? You want to view your own options. You want to see what can happen and give yourself the best opportunity to progress your career, so you wouldn't cut your nose off to spite your face 6 months early. And from the club's perspective, as I say, I don't think they view it like Newcastle fans do. I think Newcastle fans understandably are looking at Isak going, he's a Champions League quality player. Champions League quality clubs will want him. If Newcastle don't have the Champions League, then 2 and 2 makes 4. But the club also knows that he's got 3 years on his contract. That's how they'll view it. At the moment, it's hypotheticals. They're taking risks, yes, but that's how they're viewing it. They're looking at the fact that all of these players have really long contracts. Anthony Gordon signed one this season, Joelinton signed one last season, Bruno signed one last season. Isak's already on that contract length with the higher wages as it stands as well. There's very little need to sell for headroom either, so they can really attack the window. That's how they're viewing it. They're not worried about those players leaving because they've got long contracts. Most deals that they would have done in January, let's be honest, would have been not the ideal players that they would have wanted. Also, it would have put their PSR situation in a difficult spot. That was the whole message of the Gahey signing. Yes, Gahey money was offered, but if they'd signed him, they would have been under pressure going into June. Now they're not. They can really have a clean slate. That's what they're thinking about. That's why they didn't attack January. I don't think that they're looking at it from a player's perspective. Away from the transfer market, Sean has asked about the Arsenal game on Wednesday. Do we treat the Arsenal game as a one-off, aiming to go and win outright, or should our strategy be different? And I think the answer to this is that Newcastle should go and win the game if they can, because they are really good on the front foot. They're really good at turning teams over, especially the bigger teams at St James's Park. Have shown that their intensity, their desire to win the game is what will help them win the game, and the fact that the St James's Park should be really raucous and should be one of the best atmospheres seen at the ground for many a year, given what's on the line. That's what will help Newcastle win this game. It shouldn't be viewed as, well, let's see if we've got a 2-goal advantage. That should be sort of seen as the back pocket. Arsenal will come after beating Man City 5-1 at the weekend, and knowing Newcastle are vulnerable after 2 home defeats, and really try and get in at them in the opening minutes, and they've got to be wary of that. But overall, I think Newcastle really do need to turn Arsenal over in transition and really make that pay, really get Isak involved. The good thing is that they won't have a plan to deliberately stop Bruno and Isak. They'll have a plan to try and attack Newcastle, so it should give Newcastle's midfield the freedom that they didn't have against Bournemouth and against Fulham to unlock Isak and hopefully add another goal. Newcastle is still in a really strong position here, even though the recent results have maybe changed the attitude to the game from where it was after full time at the Emirates. But I still think Newcastle are favourites, and I still think they should get through from this position, especially if they do play their own game and attack to win. And the final question is, any evidence that the expanded scouting network Mitchell has talked about in September? Newcastle haven't been announcing scouts all over the place, but if you look at the fact that they've made inroads on young players, the young lad from Turkey, Yilmaz, is looking likely to come in. There's a guy from Malaga, a winger from Malaga, who's they're talking about on a pre-contract agreement at 18. That's the level of what Paul Mitchell is looking to achieve and enhance, and more players like Yankuba Minter that were signed pre him. He spoke in his big address in autumn about being more like Brighton, and that can't be the same for the first team recruitment because Brighton certainly have limitations on what they want, but what they are very good at is finding gems of players at very young ages in very obscure markets. You look at Evan Ferguson from Ireland, Moises Caicedo from Ecuador. That's what they're trying to do, Newcastle. That's what they're trying to achieve, and they have had examples of that. Pivas coming in from Serbia, Minter being the best example so far, but there are a couple of those players, Yilmaz and this lad from Malaga, who are on the radar and very much in the ilk of that. Newcastle's youth system is getting a lot of good young players in. A better quality of player is going to enhance the team long term. But as I said, this all comes back down to the medium to long term view that Newcastle are taking. It isn't exactly what fans want. That's why they didn't act in January. But their scouting system is more to do with their younger players and finding gems in markets, a lot like Brighton do. That's what Paul Mitchell wants to do, as well as strengthen the first team, which they now have the ability to do in the summer. Yes, they've taken a risk on Champions League football, and it will be a disappointment, and it will be difficult for them to avoid certain things if they do miss out on Champions League football, but they've taken that risk, and they're not viewing it like fans are, because in terms of players wanting to leave because of the contracts that are there. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope those answers have been good to the questions asked. If you have any more, drop them in the comment section below. Let's keep this conversation going, and I'll be back on Thursday to look back at the Arsenal game when hopefully Newcastle United have booked their place into the final of the League Cup at Wembley. See you then. Cheers.